On today's World Insight, Chinese President Xi Jinping at the Leaders' Summit on Climate. What's on the agenda? What's next for global green governance? And as the Leaders' Summit on Climate proceeds, a former U.S. ambassador to China weighs in if climate cooperation could be the icebreaker in Chile relations.
The main issue for him back then was climate change. I'm glad that he's in China. This is not going to be easy. I think that the Chinese government wants to address climate change. Don't question about it.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a virtual address on Thursday at the Leaders' Summit on Climate hosted by the United States. The Chinese president called upon countries to work together against this global challenge.
绿水青山就是金山银山.
We must be committed to green development. Green mountains are gold mountains. To protect the environment is to protect productivity, and to improve the environment is to boost productivity. The truth is as simple as that. We need to make sure that a sound environment is there to buttress sustainable economic and social development worldwide.
That was Chinese President Xi Jinping at the Leaders' Summit on Climate. Last week, the Chinese president also met virtually with leaders from France and Germany, also about climate action. He said these issues should not be used as bargaining chip for geopolitical gains or an excuse for trade barriers. It was taking place simultaneously while John Kerry and Xie Zhenhua, who are special climate envoys of the two countries, met and put out a joint statement on climate crisis. They both agreed on concrete actions this decade to cut greenhouse gas emissions. So, what are the next practical steps in the battle against climate change, and how big is the potential of green initiatives? For answers, I talked to Marcos Trejo, the president of the New Development Bank, on the sidelines of the Boao Forum for Asia. Let's listen to his answers. In the last Board of Governors meeting, you said cooperation is both your value and a method. How do you see NDB at this point be able to demonstrate that out of quite complicated situations?
I see it with great satisfaction because the New Development Bank 6 years ago was a dream. It was a project. It was something on a piece of paper. And the institution has moved from being an idea to now providing loans to countries, to its member countries, 76 different projects. We are edging close to $30 billion of project approvals. So it's something that I think is really making a difference in people's lives, which at the end of the day is the most important task of development. And we do so in a very cooperative way because I think, as you very correctly put, there is a deficit in terms of international cooperation across the world, is a deficit that we must fight. And I think the New Development Bank contributes its share. I mean, we're talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. These are big players. They're important players. Big territories, big populations, big contribution to global GDP. So if these countries are cooperating, if they are working constructively on issues of their shared interests, I think that provides a very good example for the world.
One of the shared issues, of course, is about green. Recently, with the joint statement put out by the Chinese and the U.S. Special Envoys on climate crisis, people seem to see some hope. Mr. President, how do you see the potential of the so-called green development and green cooperation?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's important for us to realize that we are passengers on the same boat. There is a thinker that I admire very much, Kishore Mahbubani, and he said that prior to globalization, we were all like on our own boats, but now we are passengers in this one big cruiser, which is our planet. So when things that are global in nature, like climate change, like the pandemic, they also need multilaterally built solutions. And I think this is one of the ways forward that we can adopt to promote a greener economy. There are many aspects with which you can call something green now. I think one of them, of course, is related to green financing. There is both an appetite and a goodwill. It's in the spirit of the times for institutions to provide liquidity and resources for projects that are green, that will allow for the economy to be less harmful to the environment. So I think this is a positive aspect, and one in which the New Development Bank can also play a role, which is to look for those sources of funding, putting them together in attractive projects, and making them available to our member countries. There's something also that has to do with the transition of our economies. I mean, many countries in the world, especially those that have seen their rise in the first industrial revolution, have used up all possible sources of energy. And I think one risk that we cannot run is to repeat the mistakes of the past. So we have to travel on a different path. And this new path also allows for the transition of some of our economies. Emerging economies do rely still a lot on fossil fuel related sources of energy. So there's mitigation, there's adaptation, and there is transition to something that is green. This is a journey. We're not going to do that from one day to the next. It's a difficult journey.
China pledged, for example, 2030 carbon peak, but that is a huge goal. Only 9 years left. Look at the coal power plants in this country, about 30 million people that are employed. So this is only one of those many examples of how this switch is not going to be easy. I'm sure also many other examples in other emerging economies of the BRICS countries.
Sometimes when we talk about green, when we talk about carbon neutrality, it seems to me that the focus is very much directed to the production plants, to the energy sources, to the technologies that are going to allow for the transition to take place faster. But we have the people, we have the workers, we have the workforce. And as life expectancy at birth goes up in different countries of the world, imagine, for example, you're a person in your late 20s or early 30s, and you are working in association with something that is closer to what the old paradigms of energy were, and you're simply taking out of the equation. So how are you going to adapt? So a crucial element in the policies of sustainability going forward have to do with the necessary efforts in training, retraining, skilling, reskilling, so that more and more people can play a productive role in the so-called economy 4.0. If we don't do that, then the social disruption, the kind of resources that we're going to have to allocate, for example, for safety nets, for social security, for unemployment insurance, is going to be enormous. And I think there's a better way around it.
But there's also another issue about common but differentiated responsibilities. How do you see this, particularly from the emerging economist perspective?
Yeah. No, I think there is the issue of responsibility. I think there is the issue also of leadership, which I think should work hand in hand with one another. When you look at the relative size of emissions from this or that particular country, it's only natural that the biggest economies of the world, the biggest 7 economies of the world, have they have a bigger responsibility in providing not only the financial resources, the technology, but also the example. For example, the country where I'm from, we know that very well, because following the 2 oil shocks in the 1970s, we were forced to go green in many different aspects. So Brazil, for example, implemented one of the most pioneering projects in ethanol-fueled vehicles that are green in source. They use sugarcane as the source of fuels, and that has allowed for the overall air quality in cities to improve a lot. Same with the hydro power plants.
There are numbers that are suggesting the amount of financial investment I'm talking about all over the world so far about the green, with the name of the green, only 3% eventually brings real results of green development.
Right.
That to us is a very interesting, if not a challenging number.
Yeah.
So how to make sure it's not just a green wash?
Well, I think it's going to depend very much on what your definition of green is. This green definition, once again, it has to be built multilaterally. We want to make sure that no country imposes what the green is to the rest of the world.
What is ESG, right?
Yeah, ESG. I mean, ESG is something that is also the result of a collective construction. I mean, we have to have common rules. If we're talking about international law, and ESG is offers benchmarks, then it has to be built multilaterally as well. When I was a young diplomat, I worked at the Brazilian delegation to the United Nations in New York, and sometimes I was a little frustrated with the pace of multilateralism, but when I thought deeper about it, I said every other alternative is worse.
Yeah.
But on the issue of green, what I wanted to share with you, Tianwei, is that in the same sense that in the past we used to look at physical infrastructure on the one hand and technological infrastructure on the other, as if they were two separate things, reality is bringing them together. There is a kind of a fusion, there is a merger between physical infrastructure and technological infrastructure. So it is wrong for you to say that, for example, your institution has to have a special perspective to technology, because technology is everywhere. The same thing about what is green, the same thing about what is sustainable. So if you're talking about, say, building railways, there's something green about it, right? It can be more green or less green when it comes to conceiving the project, to the ESG criteria that you're using, the sort of references that you have, the local associates that you can relate to so that the implementation is the best one possible. So no matter what area of infrastructure you're talking about, there's something green about it. Of course, there's green finance, so it's going out there in the market and say, listen, we want to raise resources. It's in the spirit of the times. I think there's lots of resources that are available for that, and institutions such as ours can do that. But when it comes to project implementation, obviously there are areas like clean energy that are more obviously related to carbon neutrality and to going green. But even if you're talking about other areas like public transportation through buses, there is a lot of green work that can be done there. So we got to make sure that this is holistic, that this is omnipresent, both in terms of the sustainability aspect as well as the technological aspects. Otherwise, we're going to miss out on another opportunity, which is to use these technologies that are so widely disseminated to the benefit of traditional infrastructure.
That's a great point. Another way of looking at which I got some inspiration if you're listening to the speech of President Xi Jinping at the opening ceremony. He's talking about the hard infrastructure, mainly the infrastructure in steel and concrete, and also the soft infrastructure in terms of designing collectively the rules and the standards.
Right.
And that, I guess, also has something to do with the future of topic of green.
Yeah, there's hardware, there is software, there is smartware, and there's the normativeware, which is, of course, the, legal infrastructure, the common adopted rules that go along with green. We are looking into those. We want to make sure that we have a leading role in that conversation. Of course, this is bigger than us, right? It's probably the sphere of conversations that take place when the bigger climate change related aspects are discussed that go beyond infrastructure, which is our mandate. But we have a place in the conversation too. And I think the best thing that we can do is to lead by example, to provide the examples. Make sure that our shareholders and the public out there look at our portfolio and they see, well, these projects here, they're environment friendly, they are ESG friendly, they provide for a bigger chance of achieving a carbon neutrality status. Yeah. This is what we are trying to achieve. One of the things that we did recently, that we're still implementing to get there, is a new organizational structure for the bank. So now we have an entire department devoted to ESG, an entire department devoted to non-sovereign operations, so that the practices that we're following are not only those that we apply to governmental clients, but also to private sector ones. So I think we are, once again, extending and modernizing our outreach.
What an experiment.
It's a new development bank.
On the way, always.
On the way. I think one of the challenges is to make it new every day. You cannot rest on your laurels. Otherwise, you say, well, we are a new development bank because we were set up by emerging economies. That's fine. That's pioneering, and that is excellent. and we'll always carry that in our hearts. But there's something else about being new, and I think you can be new if you marry the physical and the technological aspects of infrastructure, the physical and the ESG-related aspects of infrastructure, and also if you have a role to play in how the new global financial architecture is being defined. Because it seems to me that in this with COVID or post-COVID world, those like old paradigms, north, south, public sector, private sector, import-led, export-led, they're all going to be reconfigured, and they're going to be reconfigured in a way that is the result of our conversation about it.
But now you also see geopolitics really play a role. Your organization, which is a multilateral institution, of course, you're mainly of emerging economies, but you're also thinking about, expanding with membership. How do you look at, what is going on in the world? What does it mean?
You mentioned something about geopolitics. Great power competition is not new in history, right? I mean, it's something that we have seen a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we don't have to go too far back into the past. Merely the last 200 years have shown how great power politics has been part of the landscape. Mm-hmm. I think the difference here is, once again, the marriage between responsibility and leadership, learning those histories, and trying not to fall into the traps that the political cycles present to you. The concrete experience of the New Development Bank goes in this direction. You're talking about countries that are truly very representative in their regions. I mean, in our membership, you have Russia, India, China, Brazil, South Africa, and we come to work every day on projects in water, sanitation, urban transportation, smart cities, digital technology, now with an increased emphasis on climate change, on ESG, and cooperation takes place. Cooperation takes place. And I think this is particularly relevant because the name of our institution is New Development Bank. So we have to live up to its own very name. And part of it has to do with membership expansion. And that is why I was very happy when our shareholders gave us the green light to start conversations with different countries for the New Development Bank to embrace new members. And we're in the process of doing so. I think very soon, maybe even this year, we're going to be able to announce some new members, which I think is great because it gives us a bigger capital structure and a bigger global outreach.
What kind of qualification would they have to have in order to be members?
Well,
see, I'm trying to get the names of those countries of members.
Yeah, no, it's a different set of criteria that involve relative size of GDP, the kind of roles that they have played vis-a-vis multilateral development institutions, where they are geographically located, because we also want to make sure, once again, that this global character, the global outreach is contemplated as we go about the membership expansion process. So it's a combination. Of course, they have to be okayed by our shareholders. Our shareholders play a leading role in defining who we're going to be talking to.
Mm-hmm. What about the future, near future? Now, of course, there are many crises you have to fight. Everybody has to fight. But the future of NDB, especially looking at the other multilateral institutions, including AIIB and other development banks, and the World Bank, which is now, like most of the UN system, is under question about its future reform. So where is New Development Bank right now in terms of your growth potential?
Even if you take all of the multilateral development institutions combined and you juxtapose them to the infrastructure needs or the development needs of the world, we have a long distance to cover. So the more development institutions we have, the better, because then they can scale up resources, they can act as conveners of money, of ideas, and I think this is particularly important. I would single out 4 areas that I think are important for us. So one of them is we have to become more of a complex and sophisticated institution, especially as we increase our exposure to the private sector. to subnational entities, to institutional investors. So we have to have more in our toolbox when it comes to the financial instruments. We have to play a leading role in the conversation of what new development policy is going to mean in the future. And I think here we have a very good raw material to draw from, which is our own very set of projects. They provide extraordinary cases of development, especially if you want to talk about what a new institution can do that's transformational. The other aspect is, I think, very much in terms of what the bank does for itself. We have set out to be a talent-intensive institution. I think talent is becoming the most important factor of production in the fourth industrial revolution. So the new development bank cannot be an outlier in this. So if you work in operations, you should also understand some legal matters. If you work in legal matters, you have to understand, let's say, ESG. So having more of this multifunctional development banker as the profile, the ideal profile of our institution. And once again, making progress on not only membership expansion, but also the expansion of the influence of the bank. If we do that, then I think, once again, we're going to be seen as a cooperation example that can be replicated. And if that is the case, I think we should be very happy about it.
Last question, Mr. President. We started our conversation by talking about trust deficit. I would like to also wrap it up, probably with a question related to that. There is enormous trust deficit, enormous misinformation, enormous amount of misunderstanding as well. Multilateral institution depends on trust the most. With your term here, what is your plan trying to build trust?
Yes, I think that's a very important question because at the very beginning of some banking institutions, they were called trust, right? So trust and banking is something that goes hand in hand.
Yes.
I know no better way of establishing trust than to establishing day-to-day coexistence. One of the reasons why I think the NDB has been so successful from being just an idea to becoming a player is that there's different countries, they come to work every day. So we interact every day. We understand from different cultures, different civilizational backgrounds. The world is very different. The world is very different. It's beautiful. It's different. Diversity. But then sometimes this kind of differences, they hold you back. And when you understand them and you're able to see how they play out on a particular project, then understanding is broadened. You can build consensus. Consensus is another very beautiful word because it means going in the same direction as of an agreed perspective. And I think we're accomplishing that at the bank. Let us work every day so that this trust is one of the most distinguished features of the new development bank.
Marcus Choiho, the president of the New Development Bank. I talked to him during the earlier Boa Forum for Asia. You're watching World Insight. Still to come. As the Leaders Summit on Climate proceeds, a former U.S. ambassador to China weighs in if climate cooperation could be the icebreaker in Chile relations. Next.
The main issue for him back then was climate change. I'm glad that he's in China. This is not going to be easy. I think that the Chinese government wants to address climate change. Don't question about it.
Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. As we speak, the Leaders Summit on Climate is being held virtually. 40 leaders, including Chinese President Xi Jinping, are attending this meeting hosted by the U.S. Some wonder, could climate action be the starting point for building at least more trust between the two countries? Earlier, I asked that question to Max Baucus, the 11th U.S. ambassador to China from 2014 to 2017 during the Obama administration. First of all, China's commitment 2030 to carbon zero and 2060 to carbon neutrality. How much sincerity do you think, Mr. Ambassador, China has already demonstrated?
I highly compliment China for setting those dates, setting those goals. For anybody can achieve something, it's better that she has a goal and a definable goal, a definable date. and zero carbon, that's very definable. Now, it's going to be difficult, obviously. There's some in the United States who might say, oh, China's just saying that. That's just words. That's just smokescreen. It's not reality. But I disagree with those. I know China well enough to know that they mean it.
The other point, whether China is going to use the climate change interactions as a bargaining chip, from this part of the world, the thinking and the logic is different. Thinking are not categorized into closed boxes, but rather everything seems to be interlinked, even philosophically in a way. And therefore, people would argue when the man-made environment, climate, has becoming soured and poisonous, can the climate change about our nature really be handled with real cooperation? That, I think, is a legitimate question to be asked, too.
Tianwei, you make a very, very good point. It should be de-linked. It's not be linked. We should address climate on its own. I think there's way, way too much linkage in too many domestic, industrial, and foreign policy areas in the world today. And I think that's partly because of the internet. Because of the instantaneous nature of communication today, that tends to force more linkage. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous because the more issues are linked, the more we face paralysis, the more we can't solve anything.
On the other hand, though, the environment in which, whether negotiators or special envoys could talk to each other, out of poisonous atmosphere, how much can they work on together?
This is not what diplomats usually do.
Yeah.
This is not what countries usually do. But I think if China or the United States were to unilaterally take the first step and show what it's doing to address climate change, and not asking for reciprocity, just show, because that will indicate good faith. Now, some might say, well, gee, you're being a sucker if you just take the first step and don't ask for reciprocity. I don't agree with that. I think it's if one country were to take the first step, that would be recognized by the other country and worldwide. And it tends to reduce tension. Each country knows better how to address it, what areas it can maybe take the first step on and what not. But I think that's important.
Mr. Ambassador, as you know very well, at the end of the term of President Trump, the Secretary of State and some members of that administration tried to smash every window they could between China and the United States. Now, this administration coming into the office with much challenge. What is the balance, right? However, we haven't seen, at least read from this part of the world, real constructive steps that this relationship will be much more constructive than it used to be.
Well, I think you're right. I assumed that when Joe Biden became president, that there'd be a floor on the free-falling relationship, but that's not the case. I'm very concerned. I think that the interchange in Anchorage did not help. In fact, I think it hurt the relationship. Both sides, I think, were a little too public in their criticism of the other. We all know that generally diplomacy is best conducted behind closed doors. This administration has not shown positive, constructive steps to try to repair the relationship. It hasn't happened yet. And I think that's for a couple of three reasons. One, and the most important, is because China has grown so quickly. It's another power as large in a certain sense as the United States. Now, that's new for the United States. It's hard for the United States to know how to deal with that. In the past, the United States treated China as a rising power, but not a co-equal power. But today, China is in fact close enough to being a co-equal power that it causes a whole new set of calculations for the United States, which it really hasn't yet figured out the answer to. So that's one reason why there's not yet been a constructive relationship by this administration toward China. There's another reason, and that's because the administration believes that there will not be a military confrontation between the two countries, but rather it's going to be more economic. And I think that's China's view too. So the United States today is building up its economy as much as it can. First by addressing COVID, making sure that Americans no longer suffer from COVID-19. Second, with a big infrastructure bill,
Yeah.
Rebuild American roads and bridges and other infrastructure. And third is going to be an effort by this administration to give significant assistance to lower income sectors of the United States, address education in the United States, and that make the economy strong. Now, it takes a while to do that, but it's focused much more on the economy, and it's also focused on a third area, and that is trying to orchestrate among its allies, Australia, Europe, and Japan, a concerted effort with respect to China, how to figure out what to do about China. So all that takes time. More quickly it addresses it and shows to China it wants to deal with China, the better. But that works both ways. China has to do the same. China has to show, not just say, but show that it wants to work with the United States. And we haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen it from either side yet.
Interesting. This part of the world will have a different way of looking at it, but that's how, you know, interactions and communications are so important right now. They need to let each other know what they are doing, what they're thinking, not just having a debate under the spotlight. Mainly,
that's true. And we have to remember that the two countries are very different. Their cultures are very different. And we have to better understand that each way. I mean, it's so unfortunate that so few Americans spend time in China, learning what it's all about. Because the more people travel in each other's country, the more they're going to realize that basically we people are all alike. American people, Chinese people have the same hopes and desires. What is it? They want decent incomes, food on the table. They want air and water pollution addressed, decent health care, take care of their, I mean, they're the same. But we need to understand that people have to know more about each other's country and spend more time in each other's country.
Mr. Ambassador, you re-emphasized this point many times in my previous conversations with you. One of the times I remember very clearly was during our visit to the tombs of the flying tigers, the museum that a Chinese private citizen built for them. And you said there that really people need to understand China better. But some would argue, yeah, well, there are a lot of people that are learning Chinese language. The U.S. is not lack of China expert one way or another. Why are you still arguing this way?
Well, it's one thing to be a China expert, but a lot of the experts haven't themselves spent a lot of time living in China. Most of them have not. In fact, Robert Lighthizer, the past U.S. trade negotiator, called me up before he went to China and asked my views. What do you do about China? I don't think he'd been to China before, at least not in official capacity. You have to eat, breathe air, understand it, understand the country, eat, taste the food, talk to people. You just need to get a sense of a country before you can really reach an agreement.
Right. It's about the texture, isn't it? The texture is really helping.
It is.
In this part of the world, there has been suspicion whether the two parties, both the Democrat and also the Republican, have come to consensus, and probably the only consensus they could have right now is against China, and therefore no matter what China does, it will be framed in a narrative that is going to be negative for the bilateral relations anyway. Mr. Ambassador, your take?
I think there's a lot of truth in that, and because President Biden's a Democrat, and because Republicans tend to be more hawkish, President Biden, is not do anything to make him look, quote, soft on China. The trouble is that Republicans know that. And to achieve short-term political gain, they're going to be even more hawkish. And that could very well force President Biden to be more hawkish himself. And of course, that's very dangerous because the further right the United States goes, the more hawkish it is, the more China is going to become hawkish as well, and it just brings us closer to a point, not a military war, hopefully not, but to a point where there could be some incident that causes even greater deterioration. This requires a lot of wisdom on both sides. We need each other, and I think the leaders both know that. President Biden knows that, President Xi knows that, but they have to show to each other that they do want to begin to work better with each other But it's very difficult now because of the competitive and strategic challenges that we face, and there's lack of trust. There's just no trust either side at this point, and they have to work together, the two presidents, to try to regain trust.
Some do not understand is why China wants to be a quote-unquote equal partner. Well, the argument from this side is, why can't China be quote-unquote an equal partner?
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Clearly, any country should pursue its own dreams without the interference of any other, so long as the country is pursuing its dreams, it is not trampling upon the rights of other countries. You know, China's a large country. We all know China's history. China today, because it's grown so much, as it's wind at its back, it's got kind of like a tiger by the tail. It's strong, and I very much admire that. Now, many Americans though are concerned about China's rise. They're almost fearful about China's rise, partly because of potential national security prowess the Chinese have, whether it's Huawei, whether it's ZTE, or other technologies which enable the Chinese government to, quote, spy on American companies, or maybe prevent supply chains from operating freely, prevent the precursors of pharmaceuticals to come to the United States. So the United States has a hard time addressing COVID. Also, and the United States in turn is reacting by limiting semiconductor shipments to Chinese companies, or claiming that certain or preventing any U.S. company from doing business with a Chinese company that may have, quote, ties with the military. We're in a situation where national security, no pun intended here, tends to trump so many issues. People are frightened, at least in America, and the only way to deal with that is for China to reassure, in many ways, and that's by actions and deeds, not just words, that it wants to be a responsible world player. You know, Zellick coined the term responsible stakeholder. China has to show that it is responsible, that it's not trying to dominate the United States. China says it's not trying to, but it's got to show that. And the more it shows that, it shows its true intentions, the more some of that insecurity in the United States will diminish.
You talk about the suspicion about Huawei, ZTE, and many other things. We have been lacking of evidence to support these kind of suspicions, and yet many in this part of the world believe that the narrative has been too strong, that has been lack of content. So I think there are very different perceptions, Mr. Ambassador, as you earlier rightly pointed out, about things from both sides. Can we work that out? What efforts will the United States make?
Well, you make a good point. You know, the United States government, especially the intelligence community, you know, raises the specter of Huawei is spying and installing back doors and so forth in the United States, but it's never produced any evidence.
Yeah.
The United States has never shown any evidence. You know, we have a phrase in America like, well, where's the beef? You know, show me. And that's not been shown yet. We haven't seen the beef yet. Now it may be there, and to be fair, you know, for national security reasons, it's often difficult for a security agency or intelligence agency to show information it has, because that gets into something like sources and methods, and it compromises the security system. But nevertheless, I believe that the United States government has to do a better job showing the reasons for some of its allegations, and that then, and once it shows them, then maybe there's a way to both countries can start to deal with it. Maybe find a technological solution, find some way to handle it, rather than just making the accusation without any evidence.
Exactly, and that's related to the national security issue that we've been talking about so much over the past 2 years, because the definition of national security really have to be clear, so that the business community, everybody that might be impacted, will be able to do their job. This is such an urgent issue. Do you see, Mr. Ambassador, that is being put on the agenda?
Well, First, your basic point I have found over the years to be very true. Both countries take advantage of the national security charge, not only to protect their own national security, but to widen the definition to protect their own domestic industries. After Eric Snowden revelations, China passed many national security statutes, and it was apparent to me that the country was not only defending itself, but also passing security statutes that would help domestic industries. Now, the United States is doing the same thing, by and large. But again, I go back to, let's put some more of this technology out on the table. We can discuss it quietly, but it's hard work. It's hard work because each side's going to be suspicious of the other. But we have to begin to address it.
Yeah.
And we also have to begin to not let national security be the large umbrella that encompasses every other adverse action that one country might take against the other.
Mr. Ambassador, my last point, and probably a personal point as well, is I saw you over the years be able to speak your mind. How much do you think both sides could still hear voices like yours?
I wish there were more, but we have a phrase in English, I don't know what it is in Chinese, it takes two to tango.
Yes.
That means if somebody speaks truth to power, and is candid and says what he or she thinks, the other person who's listening has to really listen. It's easy to criticize China. It's very easy to do so. It's harder to not criticize China. It's harder to say, wait, gee, maybe China's not so bad after all. Maybe there's something we could figure out here together, work together. But that takes courage, especially in this very toxic environment in the United States, where any positive statement a member of Congress might make will have his or her head chopped off. It is just very, very toxic today. And a lot of this takes leadership at the top. If President Biden is, and I know he has the capacity, I know he has the inclination to be very constructive, to be more of a father figure, try to, stand up and gonna say what's right. He can do very well. Now, people know, even though they speak very negatively at times, they know we have to work together, our two countries. They know that. There's no other option. There is no other option. And the more we can work together, the better. And we just have to follow those better instincts, and that'll help us.
Yeah. Max Baucus, the 11th U.S. Ambassador to China. Sir, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye.